Hello YTPC, Ethan, Parsimonious Piper here. Today we've got another Morsels for mental manducation. But first, in a beautifully grained 3-star Pipe by Lee Dublin, I have got some of Gatlin-Burlier's No Local. By no local they mean no American leaf. It is a Balkan blend of Turkish, Macedonian Orientals, and Latakia. I will leave a link to their site down below, but it hasn't been updated in a while. This blend, No Local, is not on the list. It is a nice Balkan, very smooth. None of the particular components just jumps out at you, so they're playing nicely together. If it sounds interesting, you'll have to give them a call in order to order it. So let's dive into our morsels for today. To begin with, if this virus is as bad as we're being told it is, why is Dr. Fauci telling us that even if you've been vaccinated, you shouldn't be, for example, dining indoors with other people? And yet, the federal government is releasing thousands of untested, unvaccinated, illegal immigrants into our border from a level 4, the worst category country, Mexico. But Americans who travel to Mexico have to show proof of vaccination or that they have recovered from the virus within a recent time frame in order to get back into their own country. Ponder that one. Now today, instead of getting into a variety of things, we're going to look at a single incident. We're going to revisit one and dive just a little bit deeper into it. So last week we covered the shooting just outside of Minneapolis of a black man who was wanted for a warrant, was actively resisting arrest. And now we have some more details. Now we know a little bit more about it. First of all, the police did in fact make a fairly routine traffic stop when they discovered who they had. They attempted to execute an outstanding warrant. That warrant was for the armed robbery and assault, choking, of a woman in the attempt of that robbery. This wasn't a choir boy who just got pulled over for having an expired tag or something. Does that change things? Maybe, maybe not. But I went back and I looked and looked. I watched the video a bunch of times on a tip from a friend. And I would like you to do the same thing. Watch that video a few times and then ask yourself, where was the gunshot? I slowed it down. There is no movement of the police officer's Glock. No movement at all. That slide should have racked if the firearm were in fact fired. On top of that, if you've ever fired a Glock in a confined space, the sound would have been deafening. It would have obliterated every other sound on the tape. There is no gunfire. Something's fishy about that tape. watch other body cam videos of gunshot incidents and compare it. There are sound suppressing microphones available. They don't do that good a job. Now, what I really want to talk today about, though, is how an incident like this highlights the very fundamental divides between the left and the right in our country today. So although this police officer has in fact resigned, before that happened, the city planner who is responsible for in this town for the personnel decisions on the police department was asked whether she should be fired. His response was that, like all city employees, that she should in fact receive due process. Shortly following that press conference, City Council fired him. Because he believed in and supported due process. Let that sink in a minute. The irony in this situation is that the city manager who was fired was in fact himself black, and he was defending a police officer, not defending the actions, but defending the right of that police officer to receive due process before a rush to judgment was made. This whole incident highlights some significant differences, as I said, between the right and the left today. First of all, the left does not believe in a presumption of innocence. You see, critical theory, which the left is pushing very hard, divides all of humanity up into classes. Some classes are oppressed classes, and some classes are oppressor classes. And if there is any conflict between the two, the oppressed class is always to be favored in whatever resolution there is for that conflict. Just a moment. And this favoring of one whole class of people over another is entirely anathema to the whole concept of justice. Justice should be blind. Now, we know it's not, and we know that there have been some egregious mistakes made in our country's past and in the past of other nations. That doesn't justify making another mistake. You are not going to correct a past wrong by perpetuating another wrong. Let me point out the conservative basis, in fact, for the whole notion of fairness in court isn't just something that came out of thin air. It, in fact, is biblical. Leviticus 19:15. You shall do no injustice in court. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great, but in righteousness shall you judge your neighbor. We don't favor one class over another, whether it's the poor, an oppressed class, or the wealthy, an oppressor. We judge fairly and righteously. Second, the left insists that we hold entire groups of people responsible for the perceived or actual sins of their ancestors. They also insist that we hold entire groups of people responsible for the actions of one or a few. And very frequently, they insist that we hold an individual responsible for the perceived actions of a group. Unless, of course, the egregious party is in fact, or the guilty party, it is in fact one of the favored, oppressed classes. And then we don't hold them responsible for the actions of the group. We simply look at them as individuals. To give you one of the most glaring examples, the left would like us to hold accountable all whites for slavery, which ended more than 150 years ago. And they insist when they meet an individual white person that all whites are racist, and therefore you as an individual, you are racist. They insist on that. But they don't allow you to point out that, for example, the vast majority of interracial violence against Asians is committed by blacks, and so blacks must all be racist against Asians because blacks are themselves an oppressed group within critical theory, and so we can't hold them accountable. Again, the principle that Western justice, that our entire system of justice is built on, does not allow you to hold one person accountable for the crime of another. And it's a biblical principle. Deuteronomy 24:16 tells us, "Fathers shall not be put to death for their sons, nor shall sons be put to death for their fathers. Everyone shall be put to death for their own sin." Of course, they're discussing capital punishment there, but the principle is clear. You don't hold people, in this case generations, responsible for the guilt of another. Finally, the left insists that we believe the accusations of oppressed people, regardless of whether or not there's any real substantiating evidence. Remember the Me Too movement, we were told to believe all women. Well, except when the women were making accusations against politicians on the left that they didn't want to see removed from power. This happened with our current president, in fact. But we're still told, believe all women. Well, except for those women. It's very convenient to be able to pick and choose which ones you believe. But this push and insistence, in fact, to believe an oppressed person over an oppressor is in fact also entirely against the concept of justice. We don't believe someone just because they make an accusation. Due process requires that we actually discover, is there any evidence that something wrong has been committed? Once more, this is a biblical principle. Let me read to you. It's a little longer passage, but it has some important things in it. Deuteronomy 19:15-20 says, "A single witness shall not suffice against a person for any crime or for any wrong in connection with any offense that he has committed. Only on the evidence of 2 witnesses or of 3 witnesses shall a charge be established. If a malicious witness arises to accuse a person of wrongdoing, then both parties to the dispute shall appear before the Lord, before the priests and the judges who are in office in those days. The judges shall inquire diligently, and if the witness is a false witness and has accused his brother falsely, then you shall do to him as he had meant to do to his brother." Now, obviously, our judges are not theocratic. So our justice system is not completely entwined with a religious system the way it was in the Old Testament. But once more, the principle is crystal clear. You don't levy an accusation against someone just on the basis, or you don't levy charges against someone or convict them just on the basis of the testimony of a single person. Before there's a rush to judgment, you gather the facts. Now, in the case of ancient Israel, that went as far as if the accusation were determined to be both false and malicious, the accuser would pay the penalty that would have been paid if the accused had been found guilty, up to and including death. Wouldn't that change our court system? No, I'm not recommending it. But you can see, just based on this look, just these three things out of this one case, the fundamental principles that the left is pushing are completely against everything that conservatives believe. And in fact, against everything that traditional Western society, both conservatives and liberals, have believed. But in America, there is very little of the classic liberal left remaining, because the left has taken over the one entire party in our country. And when you see this, when you see it repeated in the way news articles and segments on television, how they are presented, they're presented, for example, just watching the local news this last week, the news presented the Chauvin trial up in Minneapolis as the trial of the murder of George Floyd. Well, it has not been established that George Floyd was in fact murdered. He was killed, and if you referred to it as the Derek Chauvin murder trial, yes, he is on trial for murder. However, the way language is used is important because it impacts how we think of things. This would make you assume George Floyd was in fact murdered. Hasn't been established. And this is one of those ongoing struggles that conservatives have now, and classic liberals have as well. You will notice there are some classic liberals who, they're not conservative in the slightest, like Alan Dershowitz, who have repeatedly warned about the excesses of the left that has come to dominate the party that he has spent most of his life in. And he has given plenty of warnings, and he's not very popular among the Democrat Party because of that, because he points out that many of these ideas, these are not compatible with traditional American thought. They just aren't. They are in fact Marxist, and we need to be aware of them. We need to combat them whenever we can. But in particular, be aware when you hear how we're being divided, how we're being set up against each other, instead of actually looking at individual cases on an individual basis, finding the facts before there's a rush to judgment. So, a little bit different morsels today. Decided I wanted to, like I said, go deep on one topic. With that, folks, like something you like. Enjoy your afternoon.